Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple minutes for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome you to today's webinar, and thank you for taking the time to join us. The Office of Restoration and Damage Assessment is excited to bring you today's presentation, Recommended Tools for Developing Tribal Service Loss Claims. My name is Christine Downs, and I'm with the Office of Restoration and Damage Assessment. And just a reminder, today's webinar will be recorded, and we ask that you hold all questions until the end of the presentation. So please welcome our speaker for today, BIA NRDAR Coordinator Sherry Kircher.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see if that, yep, there we go. I think I know most of you, but I just wanted to just introduce myself real quickly. My name is Sherry Kircher, and I have worked for the BIA for 3 years now. I came over from Fish and Wildlife Service, and I worked there for 27 years, and I started my career at NCTC. And one of the first courses that I put on was Natural Resource Damage Assessment Training. So I have a lot of experience with NRDA from the training aspect all the way up through. I worked in the Chesapeake Bay Field Office on NRDA cases in Maryland and Delaware for 15 years. And then I was the Southwest Regional NRDA Coordinator in Albuquerque for 7-8 years. And then I moved over to BIA. So I'm planning on retiring here shortly, but I wanted to share a talk that I gave at CTAC back in October, and just before I left. So anyway, the title of my talk is Recommended Methods for Developing Tribal Cultural Loss Claims. And I co-authored this presentation with Kristen Scrabus, and she, unfortunately, she left last week. So she won't be here to provide additional information, but I'll do the best I can. So, well, I don't need to share all of this introductory stuff with everybody, because I'm assuming all of you know what natural resource damage assessment and restoration is. When I presented this to the CTAC group, there was quite a few people in there that may not have known what it was. So today I'm going to basically talk about claims and injury categories, give you some economic tools for developing claims, how to incorporate Indigenous knowledge, and finally, the part I like the most is giving you some examples and recommendations on pulling a tribal loss claim together. And just to give you some background on this talk, when they asked me to give one at CTAC, I thought, oh, this is great. I'll just go ahead and I'll I'll present the usual economic tools that we use for creating a tribal use claim, and Kristen can pull all that information together, and I'll just present it. So when I wrote up the abstract and I gave it to Kristen, I said, well, just show me what you normally do pulling a tribal use claim together. And she said, Sherry, we don't have anything. We don't have like a model like a HIA or a REA that we would typically use. So, and I'm like, oh, great. All right. So I had to shift this talk a little bit. So it became more of less of an economics talk and more of a how to incorporate Indigenous knowledge and things to think about when you're pulling a tribal use claim together. Shoot. Okay. First of all, just very briefly, the mission of the DOI NRDA program is to restore natural resources that were injured as a result of an oil spill or hazardous waste substance release. It's a partnership between federal and state agencies and federally recognized tribes. And together we act as the trustees. And a NRDA consists basically of two parts. There's an assessment portion where you determine damages and what was injured. And then there's a restoration portion that restores the injured resource back to baseline. And I'm assuming that all of you know more about NRDA than that. So a cultural service loss is a little bit different. It looks at the ecological injuries, and then it takes it one step further by looking at how the tribe utilizes those ecological plants or animals or whatever resource it is, and the cultural ceremonies and practices that involve that are around that plant or animal. And it reflects the change in the cultural well-being resulting from a natural resource injury. And it looks at the practices in the economies and the tribal well-being associated with those injured resources. Just briefly, Kristen supplied this slide, and it's basically a reminder that we have to use scientifically acceptable methods when we pull together our damages. We either use like a fish advisory, some kind of threshold that if you exceed that threshold, there's an injury. We also use appropriate state health agency standards, but it has to be something that is tried and true, has been utilized, and has a good track record. It's not something that you just kind of make up on the fly and hope it works. So some of the economic tools that we typically use in NRDA, and most of you have heard of these before, is a HIA, a habitat equivalency analysis that looks at the habitat that was impacted, resource equivalency analysis, which looks at one particular species. For example, I had an oil spill and we did a REA on ruddy ducks. Direct replacement can also be used. You can use a multiplier. This is usually when you might use fish stocking. You put the fish back that were killed during a spill or a release. For lost human use, we typically look at the cost it would have, what it would have cost the hunter or the fisher person on going down on a daily trip. So you would calculate the gas that they would have burned if they stayed in a hotel, all the equipment that they might have used, and come up with a cost per trip, and then estimate how many trips were lost during that time period, and that sets the lost human use. So there's a whole suite of different ecological and human use methodologies for pulling together an injured claim. For a tribal culture claim, it's a little bit different. We don't, like I said before, we don't have a standard method. So we rely on questionnaires and interviews. There's a lot of times you'll see in tribal lost use claims where they'll interview the elders and they'll find out what plants they would use, what ceremonies they use them in, how often do you gather them, where do you gather these plants, how do you process them, which is really important. Because like one time, for example, I had a case where they were using willow to make baskets. And when we talked to the elders, we found out that when they processed the willow, they put the plant in their mouth and they draw it through their mouth. And the elders and the others that were doing this were getting acid burns on their mouth from the acid mine drainage from that was sticking to the willow plants. So if we didn't take the effort to interview the elders and talk to them about how they process these plants, they never would have picked that up. So it's important to interview them and talk to them and get to know them a little bit better, gain a level of trust so that they respect you and they trust that you're going to take care of this information and not, spread it out there and just give it to the general public. So other things that we've used in the past are these cultural activity videos. And the Cherokee have a really great suite of cultural videos that are available to the public. And one of them, and this is in Tar Creek, and we watched a lot of these videos when we looked at, when we were doing the damage assessment. And it shows you how the people, collect spring onions. They go down to the stream, they're in the floodplain, and they're digging them up with a trowel. So if that creek is contaminated with metals and it floods occasionally, those onions could be impacted. They could have contaminated sediment on them. They're growing in an area that could be contaminated. It's interesting to watch how they collect them, how they process them. They just rinse them off in the stream and cut them up and put an egg with them, and they eat them right there and there. Another video that they had that I really liked was the fishing video, where they would take the boats out at night and they gig fish, but they take them back and they put them in these huge deep fryers, and the bones crystallize and they eat the whole fish. So not only are they not like Western societies where you would just fillet a fish, they're eating the bones. And if you know anything about lead accumulates in bone. So there's another exposure route. So it's really important to get to know the tribe and how they utilize these resources and the methods that they use. So another thing that I like to emphasize when I'm working with the tribe is the earlier you start talking about restoration, the better. If you know what is important to the tribe and what kind of restoration projects that they may be interested in, it gets them to thinking about, what they would like in the end. And I find that if you have a target or a goal that everybody agrees on, it makes getting there a little bit easier. So a lot of tribes that I've worked with are really interested in land acquisition, and they've lost a lot of land historically, over the past hundreds of years, and they would like to get some of that back. So usually that's one of the restoration things that they're interested in. But it could also be restoring a fishery. It could be a tribal apprenticeship program that they're interested in, a stream restoration. There's a whole suite of different things. And if you get them thinking about what kind of restoration projects, that tends to smooth out the bumps, in the middle. Okay, Indigenous knowledge. It used to be called TEK. Sometimes it's still referred to as that. Is a body of observations, oral or written knowledge and practices that promotes sustainability and responsible stewardship of cultural and natural resources. And this is a more holistic way of looking at the environment. And tribes tend to get confused, I would say, about how Western science tends to compartmentalize things into little boxes, and they just focus on, would just focus on one kind of plant or just one stream. And to them, they look at it more holistically. So it's not just the biology or the physical geography of the area. It's also social, cultural, and spiritual. So it's much broader, much more more encompassing of things. And it's not just, oh, I'm going to focus on this tiny little plant over here. It means a lot more to them too. So just remember that Indigenous knowledge and Western science represent different but equal ways of knowing. So, and when I put this talk together, the agencies were just issued a guidance on incorporating Indigenous knowledge into federal research. And I don't think this has been rescinded. I think it's still available to everybody. I really like this quote: "What you call resources, we call our relatives." And I think it just emphasizes the fact that this is very, very personal. And I can't tell if Jo Ellen is on this call or not, but I borrowed this slide from her, and I think it's a really good example of how to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into NRDA and injury pathways. And if you were at the workshop in New Orleans back in 2023, you probably saw Carletta Toulouse from the Havasupai tribe talking about the uranium mining in the Grand Canyon area. And she and Jo Ellen worked on a conceptual model of different exposure pathways that the Havasupai could be exposed to uranium waste. And it gets you to thinking about, not only the Western way that we would be exposed, say, for example, groundwater. If you had contaminated groundwater, how might the population be exposed? And it could be possibly through skin contact. You're, taking a shower in it, or you're drinking it. So those would be probably the two primary routes. But if you're a Havasupai tribal member, you're also probably participating in sweat lodge ceremonies. So here you are in a confined area, taking contaminated water, pouring it on a hot rock, and then inhaling it. So there's an additional route that you normally wouldn't consider that you might be getting exposed through your lungs. They're also sweating, so it's getting into your mouth. It's you're having skin contact with it. There's also ceremonial plants that are used during a sweat lodge ceremony. So there's another route. If you're gathering medicines or you're gathering sediment, you might be using it as a body or facial painting. So there's another route. You're getting skin contact, might be getting into your mouth, might be inhaling the dust. So there's a lot of different exposure routes that you may not be aware of if you're not part of this tribe. So this is where it's really valuable to get to know the tribe, and hopefully they trust you enough to share their knowledge with you. The next step is they took all of the different aspects of Indigenous knowledge, the environment, belief system, ceremony, food, and they made this circle. And then around the outside, you'll see all of the different potential exposure routes and all of the different ways that how plants are used, all the different methods that they could eventually come into contact with that. So I don't know if, well, maybe at the end, if Jo is on, maybe she can, provide some more details on this example. But all right, I know this is a relatively short talk, but it was designed to be 15 minutes for CTAC. So, but what I really want you to take home is that Indigenous knowledge and Western science are equal, but different but equal ways of knowing. The NRDA cases can be addressed through tribal cultural use of natural resources. I know that there was recently a court hearing that said no, tribal cultural claims cannot be brought forward. But I believe that stands a good chance of being appealed. So I'm not too worried that it's going to change the way that we do things. And lastly, the tribal service loss claims consider different exposure pathways and different ways of gathering and using plants and animals. And it's important that you take the time to get to know them a little bit, get to know the tribe better. Just one more example of an experience that I had that I was really brought this to light was I worked on the Silvertip oil spill in Montana. And at the time I was there, we were trying to find out from the Crow how they used, what plants they used, and how they might have been impacted by the oil spill. And so we were told to go ahead and find out. So we had an archaeologist who was a male archaeologist. He decided, he talked to a Crow member and found out that the willow are important for making the structure for the men's dances. They make like an arch, and it's very important so that the willow could be impacted because it grows down near the river. And somebody else brought up the fact that the Crow have very strict gender roles in their tribe. So the men only talk to men, and the women talk to the women. And the men have their own dances, the women have theirs, and the women are in charge of food and medicine. And it was like this light bulb went off, like, uh-oh, we didn't talk. I mean, it was a male archaeologist talking to a male Crow member. They only got the male plants. We didn't get all of the food and the medicine that the women work with. So there was this like, uh-oh, we better hurry up and try to find out more about the food and the medicine components, or we're going to be missing a huge part of this claim. So unfortunately, we didn't have time to really sit down and get to know the Crow very well. But we did find a book where a tribal member, she wrote all about the food and the medicine. So at least it was a start. But you also have to remember that some tribes have very strict gender roles, and if you didn't know that, then you would have missed out on a lot of and getting a full picture of what was going on in that case. So, okay, I'm going to end it with that and open it up to questions.
Great, thanks, Sherry. Just so people know, there's a couple ways you can do the questions. You can either put it into the Q&A if you don't want to speak, or if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand and we can turn on your mic. Maybe just before we get started, Sherry, someone did ask if it would be possible for the PowerPoint to be shared or some version of it after the talk.
Sure. Yep. I'll give it to you, and then I don't know how you normally do that.
Okay. We can disseminate it for everybody that's attended once the talk is done. And then as questions are coming in, I don't know, I see Joe is here. Joe, did you want to say anything or elaborate? I know Sherry had mentioned that on the slides.
No, I'll just be here to answer any questions that folks may have on that particular project. But I thought Sherry did a good job of giving the background and the context. So thanks for that, Sherry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the slide. Appreciate it.
So we do have a question from John. He asked, can someone comment on the use of the tribal REA? Is it a preferred approach, or should other approaches be pursued instead?
Do we have any economists on this? Is Pat here, or? I don't really feel confident talking about it. Oh, there's Pat. Yay. Okay, Pat, go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry, Sorry, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't feel like I would be able to answer that question offhand, since most of the tribal work, I think Christian and Ted were the ones who were doing a lot of it. But it's something that we can, think about a bit more, for the economists who are still here and working on this stuff. But it's definitely, there's a lot of stuff to sift through, I guess. But yeah, Pete, why don't you jump in? I think Pete, there you go.
Okay, yeah. Can folks hear me? Okay, so yeah, I mean, just to add to, I guess, what Pat was sort of saying, I see John's question, and I was was like, well, how do you just sort of define a tribal REA in that sense? I'm not sure if it's just anything sort of separate or different. I think it may be a REA. It's still a REA at heart, but I think it's trying to capture maybe the uniqueness of of how the particular tribe uses a particular resource, or species, or plants, or whatever. So I think at its heart, it's still the same basic concept that is still being applied. But as far as like if it's to youth, or if it's preferred, I guess it just sort of depends. Just again, for the particular circumstances for that particular tribe. I think that's what you're trying to capture, is the uniqueness of, or the unique circumstances for that particular tribe, and is it addressing that, or their issues. That's the way I see it. So it's not necessarily anything different. I think the same concept is being applied.
Yeah, John, I remember Kristen, when I was putting this slide together, I mentioned the TREA, and she said that there were problems with the TREA. She didn't really go into a lot of details, but I think based on some of the sites that we've worked on, it's been used in a way that she didn't agree with in the past. I can't say that all of them were incorrect, but her experience was like it hasn't been anyway, there are issues with it. I'll just say that. Yeah.
And I'll add in a thought that occurred to me while we were talking here, which is that if I'm channeling Kristen correctly, there's a lot of cases where, and I think this is what Pete was saying too, there are things that are important to the tribe that can be, addressed via our regular REAs. So for example, if you have a case where we know that particular species of fish is very important to the tribe, you may do a fish REA that will cover, that particular resource, or will bring back habitat that will address, that set of needs. So maybe not specifically tribal REA, right? But again, there are things within our normal wheelhouse that will have good overlap with things that we're looking for in restoration that's important to tribes as well. So that's one way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think, to Pat's point too. Thanks for that, Pat. I was thinking of the use of REA, or other tools, and but focusing specifically on REA. Again, it's the idea is it might not address every single issue, concern, or use or practice of the tribe, or explicitly sort of acknowledge it in the use of a REA. But again, it's a tool to kind of get to some point of identifying maybe some scale of restoration that would be helpful or necessary or acceptable. But again, recognizing that it's not necessarily going to fully address every single issue, concern, or practice or use of the particular resource by the tribe.
I noticed, Dave, you have your hand up. Dave, you're on mute if you're talking.
Oh, sorry. I thought you unmuted it. I had to click. My bad. So I worked with Kristen on some of the studies looking at tribal cultural methods, and particularly focused in on some of the non-economic type methods that could go along with the economic methods. I think that when you look at a tribal REIA, one of the problems is it's kind of still based on Western philosophy and travel cost methods. And and if you're flying out from Denver to fish in the out in the mountains in the west, and you turn around and say, well, this watershed's contaminated. Well, I mean, if you have a home on that watershed, that's a bigger deal than if you're just going trout fishing. In which case, say, well, hey, I could just as easily for the same costs go or similar costs go to this other watershed that's not contaminated. Substitutability is a readily accepted factor in some of the economic methods for just traditional Western society that don't necessarily apply to tribal. I mean, where the tribal, this is your homeland, and you're not just going to pick up and move to somewhere else. First of all, it's probably some other tribal homeland if we were to, but it's so if you're going to use a tribal REIA, I mean, if Pete started down that path, is you need to think about what's not captured in terms of their feeling of responsibility to leave things as good as they found them, the sense of place, etc. So you need to kind of supplement, in my mind. Um, Otherwise, you're really just applying a Western standard on a totally different culture, and you're not really capturing the cultural impacts to the tribe, which tend to be significantly different than they are to Western society.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I do see John had a question regarding the oral arguments heard by the Ninth Circuit on April 17th. And he was asking if there was an attorney present who could comment on it. And he believed that tribal cultural claims are a center of the argument. I also saw that Yvette had, with the Colville tribes, had responded. I didn't know if she wanted to say anything to that or if there was another attorney on the call who wanted to speak to that. If so, just go ahead and raise your hand.
Or another question that was asked had to do with if there was any other court cases. So if anybody has any other information out there, please feel free to add to the conversation.
Go ahead, Jeff. I think, yeah, you've worked on that case, so. Jeff, you're on mute if you're talking.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay. The mute button only shows up when you let it. So, all right. Yes, I'm the project manager out here in Upper Columbia, and the Pecudis litigation is closely related to the Upper Columbia project. It is just the Colvilles in the state of Washington, but it's very closely related, as Yvette, added some references here to the to the overall claim and to the trustee claim. And so we're following it closely, in fact, supporting through DOJ and an amicus brief and the whole bit, the Colvilles. Deirdre Donahue is our lead for DOI, and I don't think she's on today. And so, she'd be able to talk a little bit more about this, but yeah, if you want to watch the hearing that happened on April 17th, you can easily Google the Ninth Circuit and watch the recording. It's about 38 minutes long. It's actually worth watching. I think it's an important exchange, and I thought it was really, really insightful and interesting, regardless of whether you're involved in Upper Columbia or not. I won't comment as to how I thought it went or anything like that. I think Yvette posted an article there maybe that talks a little bit about that, but there's a lot of information there. If you go back to the reason that the Colvilles are there, you can also look at the district court case, and you can look at the partial summary judgment that Tech Resources was granted, and it's pretty it's pretty definite. The district court talks about the fact that they don't see where CERCLA even implies reference to cultural resources, that there's no reference to cultural or tribal service damages, and so that language was problematic, to say the least. And so the fact that it's being appealed is very important in the Ninth Circuit. And I don't know how much more is there to say about that. I think the hope is that the Ninth Circuit has a little more knowledge on the topic and pushes back the topic to the district court and into the litigation so that it can be handled correctly. But I guess we'll see where it goes. One last thing, the district court summary judgment also talks about what it thinks is the only other cases where cultural resource, they call it damages, cultural resource damages, and the concept of those have been explored. And I think it's Coeur d'Alene tribe versus Asarco. And then I think I'm looking at it now, there's also a Gold King mine release, San Juan County reference that they use. So that might in part answer one of those other questions. But that's from the project manager standpoint. Again, I'm not an attorney. Again, Deirdre Donahue on the interior side, if you had further questions for her. But again, Yvette and the folks of the State of Washington Attorney General's office and the Colville Tribe attorneys are working hard on this.
Thanks, Jeff. So we have a question from Megan. She said, are folks aware of specific cases where a court determined tribal service loss claims were assessed properly? I thought that could help trustee councils in figuring out how to do things in a way that will hold up litigation. Okay, well, if anyone, Sherry, did you want to comment or?
No, I was just going to say, I wish we had an attorney on the call. I would feel more comfortable them taking that question.
Sure. But Megan, if, we can try to put you in contact with someone perhaps that can answer that. Stacy has a question. If the same area is assessed for injury by the full trustee council as well as separately by individual tribal trustees, can you address any considerations to be mindful of?
The only thing that comes to mind when you talk about assessing the same area by multiple entities, it looks like is my first concern that pops in my head is double counting. It's just making sure that you're not, piling on the same injured resources, and that's what I think of. Anybody else have a comment?
Okay, if no other comments, does anyone have any other questions that they would like to ask?
If anyone thinks of anything else later on, please feel free to reach out to ORDA, and we can help point you in the right direction of someone that might have some answers for you. As far as having cases that are representative of what works, is we still have stuff in process right now, so don't necessarily have a lot of good examples of what is and isn't working. But Sherry's correct, double counting is definitely a consideration if you're looking at multiple resources in the same area or the same resources being used in different ways. And we can drop an email in the chat for everyone to use to reach out to us. And I will second that. Thank you to Sherry for her many, many years of service, and happy retirement. Thanks, Stacy, for sharing that. And since it appears we don't have any other questions, once again, well, thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate your time and hope you all have a great rest of your week. And thanks to Sherry. Appreciate your time on this.
All right. Thanks.